She was left with nothing but the clothes on her back and a mountain of debt he'd put in her name. What he forgot, in his meticulous crusade to erase her, was the one thing he never knew existed, an old, forgotten pole barn her father had hidden in the deep woods of the north. What she found there wasn't just a second chance. It was a reckoning. If you've ever felt like your story was over, only to find a hidden chapter you never knew was written, then stick with me. Hit that subscribe button, because we're a community of people who know that the end is often just a really, really hard beginning. The day the final papers were signed, it didn't rain. I think I wanted it to. I wanted some pathetic fallacy, some moody gray sky to match the hollowed-out cavern in my chest. Instead, the sun was relentlessly cheerful, bouncing off the courthouse windows and making me squint. Mark's lawyer, a man with a smile as thin as a paper cut, shook my lawyer's hand. My lawyer, a court-appointed man who smelled faintly of stale coffee and defeat, just gave me a tired shrug. There was nothing more to be done. Mark had won. He'd won the house we'd built, the savings I'd nurtured, the car I'd paid for, even the dog we'd adopted together. He won because he had the better story, the better lawyer, and the better stomach for cruelty. He painted me as unstable, frivolous, a drain. And the court, in its infinite, indifferent wisdom, had believed him. I walked out of that courthouse and into the blinding sunlight, feeling less like a person and more like a ghost. I had a single suitcase in the trunk of my borrowed car, a rattling sedan my friend Maria had lent me out of pity. I had $317 to my name, and a court order stating that half of my future paychecks, should I ever get any, would be garnished to pay off joint debts he had strategically and solely accrued. It was a masterclass in annihilation. He hadn't just left me. He had systematically unwritten me from our shared life. My new home was a third-floor walk-up in a part of the city that smelled perpetually of damp concrete and fried food. The apartment was one room, plus a bathroom where the shower head wept a constant, rusty tear. The window looked out onto a brick wall. It was a space designed for transients, for people on their way to somewhere else. For me, it felt like the end of the line. For 2 months, I lived in a fog. I got a job waiting tables at a diner where the tips were as thin as the coffee. I ate ramen and toast. I slept on a mattress on the floor and tried not to dream because my dreams were still set in a life that no longer existed. They were full of the scent of cut grass in our old backyard, the weight of our dog's head in my lap, the sound of Mark's laughter before it had turned sharp and metallic. Grief is a strange, heavy blanket. It smothers everything. I didn't cry much. The shock was too deep for tears. It was a cold, hard knot in my stomach that just stayed there, a permanent resident in the empty space he'd left behind. I felt a profound and terrifying sense of shame. I had failed. I had chosen a man who could do this, who could look at the life we built and see it as nothing more than assets to be liquidated in his favor. What did that say about me? About my judgment? About my worth? The questions circled and circled, a vulture's patient orbit. The mail was the worst part of the day. It was always a fresh delivery of pain. Red-stamped envelopes, collection notices, letters from credit card companies addressed to both of us, reminding me of the life and the debt I was still legally tied to. Most days I just threw it all into a shoebox under the sink, unopened. It was a box of venomous snakes. I knew I should deal with it, but I didn't have the strength. Facing it felt like letting the poison in. It was on a Tuesday in late October, the air finally carrying the crisp, melancholic bite of autumn, that the different envelope arrived. It was brown, official-looking, with a county seal I didn't recognize. It wasn't from our old county or the one I was in now. It was from a place called Northwood County. I'd never heard of it. My first thought was that it was a mistake, another piece of junk mail pretending to be important. I almost tossed it into the shoebox with the others. But something, maybe just the novelty of it, made me pause. My name was on it. Clara N. Miller. Not Clara Henderson. Miller. My maiden name. A name I hadn't used in 6 years. My fingers felt clumsy as I tore it open. Inside was a single computer-printed sheet. It was a delinquent property tax notice. It stated that parcel hashtag 07-4B221, located at 14 Quarry Road, was 2 years in arrears. If the balance of $84,217 was not paid within 60 days, the county would seize the property and sell it at public auction. At the bottom, listed under owner of record, was my name, Clara and Miller. I read it 3 times. It made no sense. I had never owned property in a place called Northwood County. I had never even been to Northwood County. I thought it had to be an error, some kind of clerical mix-up. Or worse, a scam. Another one of Mark's elaborate traps, somehow. My mind immediately went there. He was capable of anything. Maybe he'd bought some worthless piece of land in my name to saddle me with more debt. The paranoia was a bitter, familiar taste in my mouth. But the name, Miller, he wouldn't have used that name. He had been insistent, almost obsessive, about me taking his. Erasing my old identity was part of the project of becoming his wife. This had to be something else. I stared at the address. 14 Quarry Road. The name tickled a distant, cobwebbed corner of my memory. Quarry Road. It sounded like something from my childhood, something my dad might have said. My dad, Robert Miller. He'd been gone for 5 years, a sudden heart attack that had taken him out of the world like a candle flame snuffed out by a careless wind. He was a builder, a man who spoke in the language of wood and stone and concrete. He was quiet, thoughtful, with hands as rough as bark and a heart that I knew, even as a child, was softer than he let on. He and my mother had divorced when I was young, and he'd always been a bit of a satellite in my life, a steady, distant presence I orbited on weekends and holidays. After he died, I'd been consumed by my life with Mark. We'd gone to his small, rented house, cleared out a few sentimental items, his favorite flannel shirt, a box of old photos, his worn copy of Lonesome Dove, and let his estate company handle the rest. Mark had been impatient through the whole process, eager to get it over with. "It's just stuff, Clara," he'd said. "Let's not drag it out." And I, lost in my own grief, had let him rush me. I sat on my lumpy mattress, the tax notice trembling in my hand. Quarry Road, Northwood County. I pulled out my laptop, the screen flickering weakly. I typed the address into a search engine. The results were sparse. It was a rural, unincorporated area about a 4-hour drive north. It was forested, hilly country, the kind of place people went to hunt or disappear. And satellite image showed a dense canopy of green. Zooming in, I could just make out a thin, unpaved line that must have been Quarry Road, and at the end of it, a small gray rectangle. A building of some kind. I called the Northwood County Tax Assessor's office. A woman with a weary, patient voice answered. I gave her the parcel number. "Yep, that's right," she said, her voice crackling over the phone. 14 Quarry Road. 40 acres and a structure. Title was transferred to a Clara and Miller on her 18th birthday. Looks like it was set up in a trust for you by a Robert Miller. The taxes were paid automatically from a dedicated account up until 2 years ago. Then the account ran dry. The world tilted. My 18th birthday. That was 10 years ago. My dad had set this up for me 10 years ago and never said a word. On my 18th birthday, he had taken me out for dinner to a steakhouse that was way too expensive for him. He'd been quiet, even for him. He'd given me a card with a $100 bill in it and told me, "Be smart, Clara. Always have something that's just yours. Something no one can take away." I'd thought he meant the $100. I thought it was just his typical, slightly cryptic fatherly advice. I never imagined he meant a piece of land. 40 acres. And a structure. Why hadn't he told me? And why had the money for taxes run out 2 years ago? I did the math. 2 years ago was 3 years after he died. Whatever account he'd set up had finally emptied. The notices had probably been going to his old address, a place now occupied by strangers, until the county did a deeper search and found me here in my brick-walled purgatory. It was a thread, a tiny, inexplicable thread in the suffocating weave of my life. For the first time in months, I felt something other than numb despair. It was a flicker of curiosity, so faint it was almost painful. $842. It might as well have been $1 million. I had less than half that to my name. If I didn't pay it, I would lose this place I never even knew I had. I would lose the last secret my father had kept from me. The thought was unbearable. This property, this mystery, was the first thing in my life since the divorce that felt like it belonged only to me. Mark didn't know about it. His lawyers hadn't found it. It had my name on it. My real name. I looked around the grim little apartment. The stained carpet, the buzzing fluorescent light in the kitchen alcove, the view of a brick wall. This wasn't a life. It was a holding cell. I had a choice. I could stay here and let this last piece of my father, this last piece of myself, be swallowed by the system, just like everything else had been, or I could go and find it. I called Maria. "Can I borrow your car for a few days?" I asked, my voice thin. "And maybe your credit card." I hated asking. I hated being the person who had to ask. "Of course," she said. No hesitation. "Where are you going?" I took a deep breath. "I'm not sure," I said, and it was the most honest thing I'd said in months. "I think I'm going to see about a place my dad left me." The next morning, I packed my single suitcase back into the trunk of Maria's car. I left a note and a month's rent for my landlord. I used Maria's card to pay the delinquent tax bill online, watching my debt to her climb with a sick feeling in my stomach. Then I filled the gas tank and drove north. I had a printout of the satellite map, a thermos of diner coffee, and the $317 that were supposed to last me until my next paycheck. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't stay. I was driving toward a ghost, a memory, a piece of land I'd never seen. I was driving toward the only thing in the world that was still mine. The city dissolved behind me, its angry gray haze replaced by the sprawling green and gold of the countryside. The 4-hour drive felt like crossing a border into another country. The highways grew smaller, the towns more spread out. The landscape began to climb, the road winding through hills ablaze with the fire of late autumn. The air coming through the open window was clean and sharp, smelling of pine and damp earth. It was the air of my childhood visits with Dad. He loved the North Woods. He always seemed more himself up here, the quiet weight on his shoulders lifting just a little. I thought about him as I drove, about the things he tried to teach me, how to read the grain of a piece of wood, how to tie a proper knot, how to be quiet and just watch the world. He was a man of few words, and I'd often mistaken his silence for a lack of interest. Now, I wondered what he hadn't been saying. What secrets were hidden in those long, thoughtful pauses? This land, this trust, it was a message sent across time, a message I was only just now receiving. By the time I reached Northwood County, the sun was low in the sky, casting long, dramatic shadows across the road. The county seat was a small town called Pine Ridge, which consisted of a single main street with a diner, a hardware store, a post office, and a handful of other shops with faded awnings. It was quiet, the kind of place where time seemed to move more slowly. I stopped at a gas station and asked the old man behind the counter about Quarry Road. He squinted at me. "Ain't much down that way," he said, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. "Used to be an old granite quarry, but that's been closed 30 years. Roads not maintained by the county past the first mile. You got a 4-wheel drive." I looked out at Maria's aging sedan. "No," I said. He grunted. "Well, go slow. It gets rough. What are you looking for down there?" "Number 14, I said. He thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Ah, the old Miller place. Big pole barn. Ain't seen anyone go down that road in years." "Thought the old fella who built it passed on. He did," I said. "He was my father." The man's expression softened slightly. "Sorry to hear it. He was a good man. Kept to himself, but he was a hard worker. Bought all his lumber from my brother over at the hardware store." The knowledge that my dad had been a part of this place, that people here remembered him, sent a strange warmth through me. He had a life up here I knew nothing about. Quarry Road was just as the man described. It started as cracked pavement and quickly devolved into a gravel track, then a dirt lane that was more pothole than road. The trees pressed in on both sides, their branches interlocking overhead to form a tunnel of orange and gold. Maria's car bucked and scraped its way along. Several times I thought about turning back, convinced I was going to get stuck or break an axle. But I kept going. I had to see it. Finally, after a long, jarring mile, I saw it. A rusted chain was strung between 2 wooden posts, blocking the entrance to a smaller, even more overgrown track. A faded hand-painted sign nailed to one of the posts read simply, 14, this was it. I got out of the car, the silence immediate and profound. It was broken only by the rustling of leaves in the wind and the distant caw of a crow. The air was cold on my face. I unhooked the chain, it wasn't even locked, and drove the car a little way up the track before parking it under a massive pine tree. I couldn't see the building yet. The driveway, if you could call it that, curved around a stand of birch trees. I walked, my boots crunching on a carpet of fallen leaves. And then I saw it. It was bigger than I expected. It was a pole barn, just as the man had said, but it was a substantial one. It was maybe 60 feet long and 40 feet wide, with a high, gabled roof. The siding was weathered gray cedar, the color of old bones, and the roof was corrugated metal, stained with rust in long, weeping streaks. It stood in the middle of a clearing that was slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Weeds and small saplings grew thick around its base. It didn't look abandoned so much as asleep, dormant, waiting. There was a large sliding door on the front and a smaller, human-sized door to the side. I tried the smaller door first. It was locked. I peered through a grimy window, but it was too dark to see anything inside. I walked the perimeter of the building. It was solid. My dad had built this, and he had built it to last. The foundation was concrete, the posts were thick, and the whole structure felt rooted to the earth. On the back side, away from the driveway, I found a small wood pile, the logs mostly rotten and a rain barrel overflowing with black, stagnant water. It was beautiful in a wild, lonely sort of way. The late afternoon light filtered through the trees, painting the gray wood in strokes of gold. For a moment, I forgot the divorce, the debt, the tiny apartment. I felt a sense of peace settle over me, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. This place was quiet. It was sturdy. It was his. And now somehow it was mine. But I still couldn't get in. I went back to the front door and looked around. Tucked up on the lintel above the door frame, half hidden by a thick spider web, was a small magnetic key box, the kind people use for hiding a spare. It was rusted shut. My heart pounded. I took a rock and tapped at it, gently at first, then harder, until the lid popped open. Inside, nestled in a bit of foam, was a single brass key. It felt heavy in my hand, like it was more than just a key. It was a key to a secret, a key to a past I didn't know. I walked back to the small door, my hand shaking so much it took me 3 tries to get the key into the lock. It turned with a stiff, grinding groan. The bolt slid back with a loud, echoing clunk. I took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and stepped out of the autumn light and into the darkness. The air inside was cool and still, thick with the smell of sawdust, oil, and dust. It was the smell of my father's workshop, a scent so deeply ingrained in my memory that it was almost painful. For a moment, I was a child again, watching him plane a piece of wood, the clean, white shavings curling at his feet. Sunlight streamed in through the dirty windows and gaps in the siding, cutting the cavernous space into stripes of light and shadow. The inside was vast. The ceiling soared 20 feet above me. It was a workshop, but it was unlike any I'd ever seen him use. It was meticulously organized, even under a thick blanket of dust. Along one wall was a long, heavy-duty workbench with a machinist's vise at one end. Tools hung on a pegboard above it, each one in its place, their outlines traced in black marker. Wrenches, screwdrivers, hammers, saws. Everything was coated in dust, but it was clear that this had been a place of purpose. In the center of the barn sat a large, hulking shape under a gray canvas tarp. I walked over to it, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I pulled at a corner of the tarp. It was heavy, stiff with age. Underneath was the dark green hood of a vintage pickup truck, a Ford from the 1950s. It was beautiful, its chrome grille dulled by a film of grime. It looked like a restoration project, frozen in time. Along the back wall were shelves, neatly stacked with what looked like building supplies. Boxes of nails and screws, cans of paint, coiled lengths of electrical wire. But one section of shelving was different. It held a row of identical, heavy-duty black footlockers. There were 5 of them. They were military-style trunks, made of thick plastic with sturdy latches. Each one had a small, white label on the front. My breath caught in my throat. I walked closer. The labels were written in my father's neat, architectural block printing. The first one read, Clara, personal, the next one, Clara, household the third, Clara, tools the fourth, Clara, the story, and the fifth, the last one, simply said, Clara, the choice. This was it. This was the reason for the barn, for the secrecy. This was his message. He hadn't just left me a piece of property. He had left me a life in a box. Or 5 boxes. A pre-packaged, just add water fresh start. I felt a wave of dizziness. It was too much. The scale of his planning, his foresight, it was overwhelming. He had built this place, filled it with things for me, created a fund to pay its taxes, all without ever saying a word. All while I was living my life, getting married, thinking I was building a future with Mark, my dad was quietly building a lifeboat for me up here in the woods. I ran my fingers over the dusty lids of the trunks. Which one to open first? My instinct was to go for the story, but my gaze landed on the first one, personal. I needed to start at the beginning. The latches were stiff, but not locked. I flipped them open, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent barn. I lifted the heavy lid. The top layer was a collection of things from my childhood. My favorite stuffed bear, threadbare, and missing an eye. A box of my old art projects from elementary school. A photo album. I opened it. It was full of pictures I'd never seen, pictures of me and him. At a lake, him teaching me how to skip stones. In a workshop, me holding a hammer that was too big for my hands. On my 5th birthday, him holding a cake with a lopsided smile. They weren't just snapshots. They were a curated collection of his memories of me. Underneath the album was his worn copy of Lonesome Dove, the one I thought I'd taken from his house, and his favorite flannel shirt. He had saved them. Or, more accurately, he had saved them for me. Tears I hadn't been able to shed for months began to fall. They weren't tears of grief for my lost marriage. They were tears of grief for my father, and tears of a deep, aching gratitude that resonated in my very bones. He had seen me. Even when I thought he was distant, even when I was wrapped up in my own world, he had been watching, and he had been planning, and he had been loving me in his own quiet, methodical, builder's way. Beneath the sentimental items was a thick manila envelope. My name was on the front. I lifted it out. It was heavy. I opened the flap and tipped the contents onto the dusty lid of the trunk. Bundles of cash spilled out. $100 bills, $50 bills, wrapped in paper bands. I stared at it, uncomprehending. I counted it slowly, my hands shaking. There was $50,000. It was an impossible sum. My father had never been a wealthy man. He was a contractor, a carpenter. He worked with his hands. He drove an old truck and lived in a small, rented house. Where had this come from? I knew the answer had to be in the trunk labeled The Story. My hands trembled as I closed the first trunk and moved to the fourth. I unlatched it and lifted the lid. This one was filled with paper. Ledgers, blueprints, legal documents, all neatly filed in folders. And on top of it all was a thick, sealed envelope, just like the one with the cash, but this one was much thicker. On the front, in my father's hand, it said, Clara, read this first. And read it all. I love you, Dad. I sat down on the dusty concrete floor, my back against the cold steel of a shelving unit. I opened the envelope. Inside were 20 pages, handwritten on yellow legal paper. His familiar block printing, so full of character, so full of him. I started to read. My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, it means several things have happened. It means I am gone. It means the money I set aside for the taxes on this place has run out. And it means you have found your way here. I'm sorry for all of it, but most of all, I am sorry I never told you about this place while I was alive. I hope that by the time you finish this letter, you will understand why. I hope you will forgive me. This barn, this land, this is your inheritance. Not just the physical place, but everything in it. I built it for you with my own 2 hands, board by board. It is your safe harbor, your fresh start, your fortress of solitude if you need it. It is something that is yours, that no one can take away. I told you that once, and I meant it. You're probably wondering about the money, about all of this. It's a long story, and not a particularly happy one. It starts about 15 years ago. I had a business partner back then, a man named Richard Slane. We had a small construction company together. We were doing well. We built custom homes. I did the building, he did the books and the client management. I thought he was my friend. I trusted him completely. That was my mistake. Over a period of 5 years, Richard was cooking the books. He was setting up shell corporations, over-invoicing for materials, and siphoning money out of the company and into his own offshore accounts. He was stealing from our clients, from our suppliers, and from me. He was clever about it. By the time I started to suspect something was wrong, it was too late. He had bled the company dry and framed me to take the fall. I was facing financial ruin, lawsuits, even potential criminal charges. I hired a lawyer, a good one, but Richard had covered his tracks too well. It was my word against his, and he had a mountain of falsified paperwork to back him up. My lawyer told me my chances in court were slim. He said Richard would bankrupt me in legal fees even if I won. He advised me to cut my losses, declare bankruptcy, and walk away. I almost did. I was beaten. I was heartbroken. He hadn't just stolen my money. He'd stolen my name, my reputation, my faith in people. But then I thought of you. You were a teenager then, just starting to think about college and your future. I couldn't leave you with nothing. I couldn't let him take your future, too. So I did something I'm not proud of. Before the bankruptcy proceedings, before everything was frozen and seized, I pulled out what little I could. I had one final construction project, a big one. I took the final payment, a cashier's check for $250,000, and instead of depositing it into the company account where Richard and the creditors could get it, I cashed it. It was a stupid, desperate, and highly illegal thing to do. It was my money, earned with my sweat, but it legally belonged to the collapsing company. I hid the cash, and then I let the bankruptcy happen. I lost everything. My business, my savings, my house. I let Richard Slane win. I let the world think I was a failure. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, to swallow my pride and walk away, branded a fool. I did it to protect that money. To protect you. I used a portion of the cash to buy this land, way out here where no one would look. I put in a trust in your name that would become yours on your 18th birthday, hoping it would be so far in the future no one would ever connect it to me. I paid cash for the materials, a little at a time, from different suppliers. And I built this barn. I built it as a vault, a place to store what I had salvaged for you from the wreckage of my life. Over the years, I slowly moved the rest of the cash up here. I bought the old truck to work on, to give me a reason to be here if anyone asked. I set up the place like a workshop, but its real purpose was to be your escape hatch. The $50,000 you found in the personal boxes for you, for right now, to get you on your feet, to give you breathing room. No questions, no guilt. It's my gift to you. Use it to live. The rest of the money, the other $200,000, is in the fifth box. The one marked the choice, and this, Clara, is the hard part. This is why I couldn't tell you. That money is, by the letter of the law, stolen. It belongs to the creditors of my old company. It has been long enough now that the statute of limitations has likely passed, meaning you probably wouldn't face criminal charges for having it. But that doesn't make it right. It's a moral debt, if not a legal one. Richard Slane, as far as I know, got away with everything. He moved to the coast, started a new development company, and is, by all accounts, very successful. He built his new life on the ruins of mine. The documents in this trunk will prove it. I spent years after the bankruptcy quietly gathering evidence. Bank statements I managed to copy, sworn affidavits from 2 former employees. He also cheated, shipping manifests that show the materials he was stealing. It's all here. It's probably enough to ruin him, to start a real investigation. So this is your choice, my girl. The money is yours to keep. You can take it, disappear, and start a new life. No one would blame you. God knows, you've probably had your own share of hardship, and you deserve a break. Or you can use the evidence in this box to go after Richard Slane, to clear my name. But if you do that, the money will become part of a legal battle. It will be seized as evidence. You might get some of it back in a settlement years from now, or you might get nothing. You would be trading a sure thing, financial security for a chance at justice, for a chance to restore my honor. I cannot make that choice for you. It wouldn't be fair. Part of me, the father in me, just wants you to be safe and secure. to take the money and run. But part of me, the man who was wronged, wants justice, wants his name cleared, wants you to know that I was not a failure. Whatever you choose, I will be proud of you. This place is yours. The tools are yours. The truck is yours. My love for you is yours. That is the only inheritance that truly matters. Be smart, Clara. Be happy. And always have something that's just yours. All my love, Dad. I finished the letter, and the pages fell into my lap. The silence of the barn was absolute. The sun had shifted, and a single, golden beam of light cut through the dusty air, illuminating the 5 black trunks as if they were sitting on a stage. My father's whole life, his sacrifice, his shame, and his hope were all laid out before me on a dusty concrete floor. I didn't move for a long time. I just sat there, rereading the letter, the words blurring through my tears. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest. He had lived with this secret for 15 years. He had carried the shame of a failure he didn't earn, all to protect me. He had allowed his name to be tarnished so that one day I might have a future. The sheer, staggering weight of his love was almost too much to bear. And Mark, the irony was devastating. I had just been gutted by a man I'd trusted, a man who had systematically stripped me of everything for his own gain. And here was the story of my father, who had endured the exact same betrayal, but had responded not with bitterness, but with a fierce, secret act of protection. The contrast between the two men, the two loves of my life, was a chasm that split my world in two. I cried for the father I never truly knew. I cried for the years he spent alone with his secret. I cried for the shame he must have felt. And I cried with a furious, burning anger at Richard Slane, a man I'd never met but now hated with every fiber of my being. But most of all, I felt the crushing weight of the choice he had left me. $200,000. It was a life-changing amount of money. It was freedom. It was an escape from my debts, from the diner, from the grim little apartment. It was the ability to start over, completely and totally, with no one to answer to. I could take it and disappear. I could build a small, quiet life for myself. I deserved that, didn't I? After what Mark had done to me. Or I could fight. I could take on a rich, powerful man. I could wade into a legal swamp that might consume me and the money. I could do it for a man who was gone. For his name. For his honor. It felt like a test. The ultimate test. What kind of person was I? Was I Mark, who would always choose the money, the easy way, the selfish path? Or was I my father, who would sacrifice everything for a principle, for love? I spent the night in the barn. I couldn't bring myself to leave. I found old blankets in the household trunk, which was also filled with basic supplies, from canned food to a first aid kit, and made a bed for myself in the cab of the old Ford truck. The cracked leather seat was surprisingly comfortable. As darkness fell outside, the world shrank to the confines of the barn. I didn't turn on a light. I just watched the slivers of moonlight move across the dusty floor. All night, I wrestled with it. My mind, trained by months of fear and scarcity, screamed at me to take the money. You're a fool if you don't. Justice is a luxury. Survival is not. Your father would want you to be safe. It was a compelling argument. With that money, I could pay back Maria. I could hire a lawyer to fight Mark's garnishment order. I could buy a small house somewhere and be left alone. But my heart, a part of me I thought had died, felt something else. It felt the sting of my father's humiliation. It felt the burn of his quiet, enduring love. Every time I pictured myself walking away with the cash, I felt a deep, sour sense of shame. It felt like I would be validating what Richard Slane did, and what Mark did. It felt like I would be agreeing with their worldview. That money is the only thing that matters, that people are just obstacles or tools, that honor is a word for fools. I thought about my father's hands. Rough, calloused, capable. They knew how to build things that were true and square. He had built this barn. He had built a life. Richard Slane had built his life on lies. Mark had built our life on a foundation of deceit that I had been too blind to see. I was tired of things built on lies. I wanted to build something real. By the time the first, pale gray light of dawn began to filter through the cracks in the walls, I knew my answer. It wasn't even a choice, Not really. It was a recognition. I was my father's daughter. I climbed out of the truck, my body stiff and cold. I walked over to the fifth trunk, the one labeled The Choice. I opened it. Inside, nestled on top of neatly bundled stacks of cash, was another folder. This one was labeled Evidence. I didn't touch the money. I lifted out the folder. Then I walked back to my car, started the engine to warm it up, and pulled out my phone. I searched for lawyers in Pine Ridge. There were only two. I chose the one with the better-sounding name, Eleanor Albright, attorney at law. I left a message on her office voicemail, my voice clear and steady. "My name is Clara Miller," I said. "I need to speak with you about my father's estate. It's complicated." The next day, I met Ms. Albright in her small office above the hardware store. She was a woman in her 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I was nervous. I felt like a child confessing to a crime. I had decided to tell her everything, the whole truth. It was the only way. I laid it all out for her. The divorce, the barn, the letter, the money, the evidence against Richard Slane. I pushed the folder my dad had compiled across the desk to her. She listened patiently, her expression unreadable, occasionally making a note on a legal pad. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, looking at me over the top of her reading glasses. "Your father was a remarkable man," she said finally, her voice softer than I expected, "and a very brave one. This," she tapped the folder, "is an incredible act of love. And this," she gestured vaguely in my direction, "is an incredible burden to place on a daughter." She paused. "What do you want to do, Clara?" "I want to clear his name," I said, the words coming out with a certainty that surprised even me. "I don't care about the money. Not if it means letting that man get away with what he did to my dad. And to others." She nodded slowly. "The legal path will be difficult. Slane is wealthy and well-connected. He will fight this with everything he has. A civil suit would be long and expensive. A criminal investigation would be out of our hands, up to the district attorney, and might go nowhere. And the money, your father was right. It would be tied up indefinitely, and its origins are problematic. You would be risking guaranteed security for a very uncertain victory." "I know," I said, "but it's the right thing to do." A small smile touched her lips. "Good," she said. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." She leaned forward. "Here's what I propose. We don't go after the money. We go after his reputation. We take this evidence not to the DA, but to a journalist, a specific one I know who specializes in financial crimes. We let him do the investigating. Let him expose Slane for the fraud he is. The public shame and the inevitable IRS audit will be a far worse punishment for a man like that than a lawsuit he could drag out for years. It will ruin him in a way the courts might not." It was a brilliant strategy. It was a sideways attack, one he wouldn't see coming. "What about the money?" I asked. "You leave the $200,000 in the trunk," she said. "You don't touch it. We document its existence. It is the fruit of a poisoned tree. Instead, you use the $50,000 your father left for you. You use it to live. You make this place your home. You honor your father not by chasing his ghost, but by building a life on the foundation he left for you. Justice for your father isn't about revenge, Clara. It's about you living a good, honest life. That's the one thing Slane could never take from him." Her words felt like a key turning a lock in my own heart. She was right. The ultimate victory wasn't destroying Richard Slane. It was me thriving. It was me building something true and square, just like my dad. We agreed. She would make the call to the journalist. My part in it was over. I had delivered the message. Now I had to start living. I drove back to the barn that afternoon feeling lighter than I had in years. A decision, a real one, had been made. The path ahead wasn't easy, but it was mine. I walked into the barn, the place no longer feeling like a dusty tomb, but like a space full of potential. It was a beginning. I started with the simple things. I opened the big sliding door, letting the fresh air and sunlight flood the space. I started clean. I swept away the years of dust, wiped down the tools, cleaned the windows. With every stroke of the broom, I felt like I was clearing out the cobwebs in my own soul. I opened the household trunk and found cleaning supplies, work gloves, even a portable camp stove and a kettle. My dad had thought of everything. That night, I made tea on the camp stove and sat on the workbench, looking out the open door at the stars brighter here than I had ever seen them. I had $50,000, a 40-acre piece of land, a barn full of tools, and a vintage truck that might one day run. It was more than I'd had in years. It was a kingdom. The next week was a blur of work. I drove into Pine Ridge and opened a bank account with my $50,000. The teller didn't blink an eye. I went to the hardware store, the one the old man at the gas station had told me about. The owner, a man named George who was the brother of the gas station attendant, remembered my dad. Robert Miller's girl? He said, a warm smile crinkling his eyes. Your dad was a master craftsman, a real artist with wood. We all felt terrible about what happened with that partner of his. A damn shame. Hearing someone else validate my father's story, was a balm on a wound I didn't know was still so raw. I bought lumber to repair a few rotting boards on the barn, a new lock for the door, and a heavy-duty generator. George gave me a contractor's discount without me even asking. Your dad's credit is still good here, he said with a wink. I started to feel a part of the place. People in town were reserved but friendly. They asked few questions. In a small town, I realized privacy was a respected currency. They knew I was the Miller girl living out the old barn. That was enough. One afternoon, while I was trying to figure out the generator, a beat-up pickup truck pulled up the drive. A man my age, with kind eyes and work-worn hands, got out. You Clara? He asked. I nodded, wary. I'm Ben, he said. I live down the road. George at the hardware store said you were trying to get the power going. Thought you might need a hand. He spent the next 2 hours helping me get the generator running, showing me how to maintain it, and refusing any payment. Neighbors help neighbors, he said with a shrug. That's how it works out here. It was a revelation. I had spent so many years in a world of transactions, of what do I get in return. Here, community was a simple, unspoken fact. A month later, Ms. Albright called. The first article just dropped, she said. It's a bombshell. The journalist did an incredible job. He found 2 more employees slain cheated. The story is about a pattern of fraud going back 20 years. Your father is mentioned as the first victim. He's portrayed as the man who lost everything trying to do the right thing. I hung up the phone and cried, but this time they were tears of release. My father's name was cleared. His story was told. Justice had been done, not in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion, which for a man like Slane was so much worse. I never touched the $200,000. It remains in its trunk, a silent testament to a difficult choice. Maybe one day I'll find a way to anonymously donate it to a charity for victims of fraud. For now it stays. A reminder. Life in the barn is simple, and it is good. I used some of the money to have a well-drilled and septic installed. I hired Ben, who turned out to be a contractor like my dad, to help me frame out a small apartment in one corner of the barn. I learned to do the wiring myself, using the manuals and tools my dad had left me. I found the keys to the old Ford in the tools trunk, and Ben and I have started working on it on weekends. It's a slow process, but I'm learning. I'm building. Sometimes I get mail from my old life. A letter from Mark's lawyer, full of blustering threats about some new imagined debt. I hand them to Ms. Albright, and she handles them. He has no power over me here. He is a ghost from a life that no longer feels like mine. This barn, this land, this quiet, sturdy life, this is mine. My father left me more than just a place. He left me a blueprint, a guide on how to build a life of integrity. He taught me that inheritance isn't about the money you're given, but the choices you make. He taught me that the best things are built to last on a foundation of truth. I look around this space that he built, this sanctuary he created out of his own pain, and I feel him here. In the solid feel of the workbench under my hands, in the scent of sawdust, in the quiet strength of the beams overhead. This place was his last project, and I am my father's daughter. I will see it through. What he built here wasn't just a barn. It was a second chance. And what I'm building here isn't just a home. It's a testament to his love and a promise to live a life worthy of his sacrifice. A life that is true and square and entirely my own. And I want to talk to you for a second. If you made it this far into my story, thank you. It means a lot to share it. Maybe you're here, because you've been through a betrayal that left you feeling erased. Maybe you've had to start from scratch with nothing but a hope and a prayer. Or maybe you've discovered a secret in your own family that changed the way you saw everything. Whatever it is, I want you to know you're not alone. This community we're building here is for people who get it. People who know that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing. My father's story taught me that true wealth isn't what you have in the bank. It's the integrity you live with, the love you give, and the strength you find when you think you have none left. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing and becoming a part of our community. And I mean it when I say I read the comments. I want to hear from you. What did this story teach you about the meaning of inheritance? Have you ever had to choose between an easy wrong and a hard right? Share your story below, because every story shared makes us all feel a little less alone in our struggles. Thank you for listening. And remember, no matter how final an ending feels, there might just be a hidden chapter waiting for you to find it.